Does this mean it's Sega Genesis time again? You know that always makes me happy. How goes it, ladies and gentlemen? Thanks for checking out Shinsen Idiot Gaming. Today, I'm going to take you back in time to a time known as 1995, and we're going to take a look at one of the games of my childhood. It's certainly one that I look back fondly on, but other people maybe not so much. And I don't mean that they look back on it but not fondly, I mean that they literally just don't look back on it, because this is not a game that I see talked about all that often. It never shows up on anybody's top 10 lists. It's really not something that makes the rounds. But here it is, Desert Demolition. This is a game that is obviously based on the Looney Tunes franchise, and more specifically the Wile, Coyote, and Roadrunner cartoons, which were always my favorite when I was younger, and continue to be some of my favorites to this day. This is, at its core, a fairly basic platformer, without really too much unique going for it, but I think it does enough that it's worth at least a look. There are two playable characters. You can probably guess who they are. And we're going to be starting out as Wile. Now, the game controls fairly simply, and the objective is in fact fairly simple as well. You are generally moving from left to right, however, some of the levels do have some verticality to them, so that mixes it up a little bit. The controls function pretty simply as well. The C button jumps, the B button runs or boosts, which we'll see a little bit of. If you have those little nitro symbols, you can tap the B button to get sort of a boost of speed and quickly run through an area. And the A button is sort of your action button, which does something different depending on your character. In Wile's case, you do this little dive, which can help you catch the Roadrunner, who of course immediately runs away, but gifts you some stamps and a clock for your trouble. The clocks in particular are pretty important in this game because you are generally given a very strict time limit in order to actually beat these levels. In fact, a big portion of your difficulty is actually going to come from that time limit. In fact, some of the levels will see you spawn in and you have literally less than a minute before your time's up. Time's up, you lose a life, and you got to start over. Fortunately, the clocks are scattered around, I think, plentifully enough that with a little bit of practice, you shouldn't have too much trouble. Now, one thing that you will notice, or maybe not, is that the controls are actually pretty responsive in this game. I've heard some criticism leveled at the controls. However, I don't think the criticism is necessarily valid, and here's why. So, obviously you'll notice that as Wile jumps around the levels, he's constantly slipping, sliding, bumping his head, exploding, falling from great heights, and just generally getting hurt. Now, although this makes the controls a little bit tricky, I feel like it's completely appropriate given the source material, right? If he was just running through the level, dodging everything, that wouldn't really be a faithful representation of the character. So with that in mind, I don't actually have a problem with it. Yeah, it takes a little bit of getting used to, but all in all, I think it makes sense. So in addition to the clocks that we can pick up, we have these stamps. And the only purpose of the stamps is to access the bonus stages at the end of each level. And the only purpose of the bonus stages would be to get a couple extra lives, perhaps, or just get more points. So if you don't care about score, you might not care too much about these. However, it's worth going into them just because there's generally a cameo by at least one other Looney Tunes character at the end of them. Goes without saying, of course, that we are going to be hitting all the bonus stages as we go through this little playthrough. And we should be hitting the end right here. Oh, I missed the extra life. That's okay. Yeah, see? Wasn't that worth it? Just to see Bugs and Marvin? Maybe. I don't know. So one thing you will notice about this game, and I haven't brought up yet, is just how great the graphics and the animations are. I would say that's probably the highlight of the game. They do just an amazing job of capturing the feel and the aesthetic of the cartoons. Everything from the way the characters move, to the facial expressions, to just the backgrounds and environments. Definitely a faithful recreation of the cartoons. And to be honest, if that wasn't there, there would be no reason whatsoever to ever look at this game. But fortunately, they pulled that part off. And what we'll start to see as we go through the levels is that they are relatively varied, however not super varied. You know, they basically take the form of a go from left to right on a single plane or two planes, and a go from left to right on a more vertical plane. But I think it's enough. You notice that I can pull off the whole bouncing from balloons just fine because the controls are responsive enough to do that. Okay, I guess we're not going up there. Now, on many of the levels, just running from left to right will not get you enough stamps to get the bonus stage, so if you see me sort of running around a little bit more than it looks like I should, that's why, because I'm trying to get all the stamps so we can check out all of the different bonus stages. It's sort of an underrated joke, actually, having an anvil floating on a balloon. I kind of appreciate that. Okay, we're gonna have to hurry this along a little bit before we run out of time. I don't know what those dudes are supposed to be, but what the heck. Okay, well, we tried. Good news is you'll notice that the timer restores in between screens. So it's not like we are thrown in here and suddenly only have 12 seconds left. And I think I just missed an extra life, didn't I? Oh well. So one of the things that Wile E. Coyote gets through the course of the levels is access to some of his various inventions, which, as you might imagine, are not the most useful things in the world. However, they are funny, and they will get you from point A to point B. And again, just thematically makes sense for them to exist, right? I used to have trouble with this part as a kid, actually, because you gotta kind of balance on there by pressing left and right. But I ended up figuring it out. Keep in mind, I was pretty young when I was playing this as a kid. So another somewhat interesting thing about the game that, well, interesting is about all I can say for it. It sounds cooler than it actually is in practice, and in fact, it might have been better to go a different route, but what you'll notice is that there is actually not any music for the most part, except for in the bonus stages. And this is because your character actually sort of creates the music as you run through the level. So if you're walking, running, sort of crouching, and sneaking, you actually get sort of a different song. And it's kind of cool, like you're sort of creating the music in an organic way, but really there's not much to it other than that. So again, cool idea. Maybe if they had fleshed it out a little bit more, it could have been cooler. I do love how he's got the whole facial expression of the lion going on, just like in the cartoon. I don't remember which cartoon that was specifically. Oh, and there's the dog, the sheepdog. Alright, down we go. And even just down to the names of the levels, like Choo Choo Terrain, it just definitely screams like old Looney Tunes sense of humor. I definitely appreciate that. Gotcha. So we can talk about, I guess, the development and the reception of this game when it came out. So first of all, the game, as I mentioned, came out in 1995. It was developed by Blue Sky Software and then published by Sega. Blue Sky Software actually made a few of the games of my childhood. They were making games all the way back on the Atari 7800, but that was a little bit before my time. So I was playing some of their Sega Genesis games. In particular, the ones I played were Jurassic Park and Jurassic Park Rampage Edition, which are either on the channel or coming soon to the channel. They made Shadowrun, Stimpy's Invention, and would perhaps be best remembered for Vector Man and Vector Man 2. So, not too shabby a resume there. Although they made a bunch of other games that are not so well regarded, like Ariel the Little Mermaid. They made Dick Tracy on the Master System, which I've seen before but haven't played. It looks kind of interesting. Avoid the Noid for the Commodore 64, so there's that. And then a bunch of sports games that I haven't played. So, like a lot of these developers that are no longer around, sort of a mixed bag, I guess. You know, this was just a licensed game that could have been garbage, but they put the time in to make it worth playing, so I can appreciate that. I believe they went under sometime in the early 2000s. They, I guess, went out of business when their parent company, which was Titus Interactive, went under. That was in the early 2000s, I think like 2004 or so. Or 2005, perhaps. So, again, always a little sad when you hear about that. Clearly, comparing this to a lot of the licensed games from like the PS1, PS2 era, this definitely has a little bit higher quality, in my opinion. So, again, a little bit sad that they're no longer around. So, how was the game received when it came out? Well, somewhat appropriately, it got very middling reviews. I mean, I would call this a... Whoops. I would definitely call this a perfect example of like a 6 out of 10 game, maybe a 5 out of 10 game, if we're going on the scale where 5 is average. No, I would say 6 out of 10. This is probably a good example of a 6 out of 10 game. You know, it's not bad, it doesn't do anything really wrong, it just doesn't do all that much that is super unique or innovative. But as far as scores go, generally around the 5 or 6 mark, so not too surprising there. I think perhaps the best quote that I found was GamePro calling it a lightweight frolic, and that is probably the best way that you could describe this game. I think at the time everybody pretty much loved the animations and the, I guess, aesthetic of the game, but generally they did not so much appreciate the gameplay as much, and I don't really have too much of a problem with the gameplay, but I can certainly see how someone might find it frustrating. And then generally just the fact that it's pretty feature light, right? There's not all that much going on, and not all that much replay value either. I didn't really find anything where people were commenting about the way that the music is sort of generated by your character, so I would be curious what people thought of that at the time. As for my part, again, I do think that it is interesting, but, you know, it's not a game changer by any means. Gotcha. And a random factoid that I found is that apparently this game was the 9th highest renting title for the Genesis at Blockbuster Video in 1995, which is kind of funny. And actually, I would say this is probably like the ideal rental game, because you could totally rent it and then complete it in a weekend and be like, well, that was fun, I don't feel like I need to play that anymore. But it is what it is. You ever notice how every good Sega Genesis game has rocket skates? Well, at least 2 of them, this one and ToeJam and Earl. Alright, we got the bonus. Oh, this is going to give you anxiety. You got to kind of get into a rhythm on this one. There we go. Use the boosts and boost over the exploding barrels. Obviously, we don't really want to get caught by the train. It's not a super great thing. And what's funny is that your character actually stays behind here. Yeah, we actually did this fast enough, but if the train catches up to you, even though your sprite disappears, you'll start, like, getting hit by it. It's kind of amusing. And again, Carl's Bad Caverns. Come on, that's funny. You know it's funny. Admit it. So I was also looking up, I was curious if this game had ever gotten a re-release, and I seriously doubt that that will ever happen. I know that licensed games are always a very tricky sort of thing when it comes to re-releases because you got a bunch of different companies that have the rights in terms of the developer of the game, the publisher of the game, the owner of the original IP, so a lot of times these things get sort of lost and never come back. Fortunately, you do have a couple options available to you. The first is just buying yourself a physical copy, because this is not an expensive game. Probably because it, again, is just not that well regarded. In my limited, and I would like to emphasize that that is very limited, research, I did go on eBay a little bit and found that you can get this game for under $20. In fact, there were a couple that were under $15. There was one that was under $10, or maybe even more than one that was under $10, if you're just looking for a loose copy. Obviously, it'll be a little bit more if you're looking for a complete copy. And as I was researching it, I also found out, because I totally did not remember, this is one of the Genesis games that came in that paper case, so good luck finding a mint condition one, because the paper boxes were just awful, as everybody knows. But I didn't really care or know any better as a kid, and I don't really collect retro games, so it's not a huge deal to me. But were you to look at that price tag and say, yeah, I think 10 to 20 bucks is a little bit too expensive for that, we all know that there's another way you can play it, and I'll leave it at that. So ultimately, I would say that, yeah, you probably should check it out. Whatever form that, that takes. Anyways, we do have a little bit of game left. It might surprise you to find out that the game actually ends with a boss fight, which is kind of weird, but it does, and we will get there. But for now, let us continue. This level obviously has a lot more verticality than some of the other ones. And also is one of the more difficult levels, I would say. Not in terms of the time limit, but in terms of just getting blown up and losing all your health. Nevertheless, it appears that we have made it. And don't ask me why it's playing this song, but I kind of like it. I think that part of the appeal here, if you're going back and playing this now, is probably just to see like what weird and wacky inventions you can find throughout the levels. And generally just if you are a Wile E. Coyote Roadrunner fan, right? If you're not that, then there's probably no reason to go back and play this one. Maybe if you're just into platforming games in general, but I mean, for me, that's pretty much the appeal right there. All right, we're going to hurry this along and just get to the end. And look at that, Sylvester and Tweety. I don't know what they're doing here, but I'm glad they are here. And that's about all I can say. Now, remember how I said the levels are fairly varied? Well, then there's this level. Yeah, with the limited number of levels that we have, are actually given a palette swap, which is a little bit unfortunate. And I kind of wish that they'd given us something better, but it is what it is. It's one of those things, right? What's the point in ranting and raving about a game that's this old? Although I suppose that some people make a living doing that, but hey, it's fine. This is the one that I mentioned that gives us very little time to actually make it through the level. So we're going to try and gather as many stamps as possible to get to that bonus stage, but keep in mind that we have to hurry pretty quickly through here. Okay. Here's an interesting one for you. I didn't even think about this before I started recording. as a kid, and even now, I certainly hear a meep meep, like with an M as in Mary. However, all the official stuff that I've ever seen has said beep beep with a B as in Barry. So, what do you think? Is the Roadrunner saying beep beep or meep meep? Now, beep beep, of course, makes more sense. That was kind of funny. But I don't know. I still hear meep meep, and maybe that's just a leftover from something I misheard as a child, but I don't know. Anyways, these are the questions that sometimes keep me up at night. That's not true, but it would be funny if it was. Now, actually, one thing I did not pay attention to, so I'm not 100% sure, is, I mean, I guess I could rewatch the footage and find out, but at this point, I mean, we're already here, right? So it's too late. The number of stamps that you need in order to get to a bonus stage is generally around the 125 range. However, I don't remember for sure if that's the same on every single level. We'll pay attention from now on, and if you are really interested, maybe you can go back and rewatch portions of the video, because I'm certainly not going to do that. But we will find out. Yeah, see, there's 125. I think it's 125 every time, but again, don't quote me on that. We'll know when we do the second video where we cover the Roadrunner. It tried to bait me there. Didn't fall for it. Alright. There we go. We're gonna just bounce along these to... There we go. Get ourselves an extra life. I mean, at this point, we have the bonus, so we... so we can just complete the level. I like that little awooga noise, though, as he looks down at the ground. Again, the game definitely oozes charm in terms of presentation. Oh, okay. Try again. Alright. Oh, classic Daffy. You know what's kind of funny is knowing that this is the studio that was responsible for Jurassic Park and Jurassic Park Rampage Edition on the Genesis. You can look at that water effect and go, oh, that looks just like those games, if you ever played those ones. Now, a really long time ago on my channel, like years and years ago, where my videos were in like 360p and you could hear a fan blowing in the background, I actually did a Jurassic Park Rampage Edition video, or maybe two, and there's a section of that game that has a waterfall effect that looks just like this. We'll probably revisit that one and also take a look at the other Jurassic Park game, because again, those were from my childhood as well. But for now, it's boss time. So, the boss fight is fairly simple. You basically have this Acme work truck driving back and forth, and you got to drop the explosive barrels on it. What I always found weird about this is when you play as the Roadrunner, I'm just going to go ahead and spoil it, you get the same boss fight, except for that it's Wile E. Coyote driving the truck. And that makes sense, but it doesn't really make sense thematically, like that the Roadrunner would be this malicious, that it would be trying to kill you by running you over and blowing you up. That doesn't really fit the character so much. So that's a little weird. Nevertheless, we will let it go. Now, what would have been really cool is if they actually made a separate boss fight, depending on which character you were, but that might be a little bit too much to ask. Anyways, this is literally the fight. You basically go from one corner to the other, and you drop the exploding barrels. If you miss, whoops, you got to go back and run to the other side again, and eventually, you know, you will run out of health or time. And we get that classic enemies change color as they take damage thing. Alright, And that, dear friends, all right, we made it to 100,000. That, dear friends, was Desert Demolition for the Sega Genesis. A pretty short game, a pretty feature-light game, but one that I enjoyed as a kid and think is probably worth checking out, if for nothing else than just the novelty of it. And that's pretty funny. Acme Customer of the Year. Yeah, I would say so. We will be doing, as I mentioned at the beginning, another video that covers the Roadrunner playthrough. It's pretty similar, but does enough different that I think it's worth checking out both. And then in our typical fashion, we will also be uploading a long play version, that being all the way through, no commentary, and I'll combine both characters into that one. So if that interests you, feel free to check them out. Otherwise, I will see you on the next video. I'll leave you with the credits as I normally do. Until next time, take care and God bless.